Hey, Kristie, welcome to the show. It's great to meet you.
Mark, thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited to chat with you today.
Well, I'm super excited to chat with you. And folks, today we're talking about selling your way in, the playbook for setting your income and owning your life, Kristie Jones. And by the way, as everybody who listens to the podcast, Kristie knows, we only actually publish podcasts with folks whose books I really like. And I really, really like this book. And I'll tell you from what perspective, I just think it's dynamite. I think it's such a helpful tool for somebody who's going into sales, perhaps in the earlier part of their career. When they go into a new organization, you and I both know that the onboarding plans are not magnificent with most companies. I think this book is such a wonderful guide for someone to drive their own onboarding plan and shorten that time to value, shorten that time to success. But we're going to get into all of that. But maybe just to start, maybe you could share kind of the short story of your professional journey through university and starting as a buyer with the Jones Company. Tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Yeah, you're right. So I went to the University of Kansas. So I'm a proud Jayhawk. Maybe not right now during football season, but I can't wait for basketball season to start. That's when we fly our flag with pride. And I did start in retail. So I spent my first 8 years out of college in a retail environment. So working initially for the Mercantile Group, which doesn't exist anymore, out of Cincinnati. The Jones Store Company was one of their stores in the Kansas City area. So we had about 7 or 8 stores in the Kansas City area. So I cut my teeth working in the stores. So as a department manager, ironically, I started by working in commission department. So I ran the cosmetics department and the shoe department. And then Famous Bar, which is part of the May Group, hired me and moved me, and I relocated to St. Louis so I could work there. I got an opportunity there to open and close. They were rebuilding 2 stores, so closing down the old physical building and moving inventory and everything into the new building. And then I got a chance to go to the buying office. So I spent my last about 5 years out of those 8 in the buying offices in the downtown store, and really, honed I think a lot of my negotiation skills came from that, and analytical skills. I go, it sounds glamorous, but no one invited me to Paris to set fashion trends. My boss just wanted to make sure I didn't run out of pink tees in the middle of summer, in size medium. So it really was a lot of math, a lot of analytics. And so that's where I said I started my sales career in retail sales, and then got disenchanted. That was a big Fortune 500 company, with lots of red tape and lots of ivory tower-ish type things. And so I had grown up in an entrepreneurial small business family. And so when I decided to make a leap out of the Fortune 500 world, I literally landed in a company with 12 employees, in the SaaS space. So back, I'm so old, Mark.
Pure startup. That's a small SaaS company.
Yeah, and I'm so old that we didn't call it SaaS. We called it subscription model back then.
Right.
So
we're the same age.
So I joined a company where we called it, we had a subscription model. And so I spent 10 years there cutting my teeth. I said I did everything but code. But if the server needed rebooting, initially when I first got to the company, the server was down the hall in a closet on the 3rd floor, which was like a horrible, horrifying to those in cybersecurity today. But really, it wasn't even locked. So I knew how to reboot the server. And if you needed Post-its, that was me. If the copier was jammed, that was me. And if you needed to help close a deal, that was also me. So in a company that size, you wear a lot of hats. So it was an amazing opportunity. I worked directly for the owner for those 10 years. About 2.5 years in, I had full revenue responsibility. So net new sales, and business development team. So I had BDRs back even in the early, by 2003, I think we had a BDR team. So we were early adopters to that. And then the customer success team, which again, when I first got there, we called account management. So I've dabbled a little bit in everything. And then from there, I kind of really loved the SaaS tech world. So I kind of fell in love with that. And so I stayed in that swim lane, as I call it, and worked for some bigger companies. And then at some point after leaving that company, after 10 years, I landed at a VC-backed company. And then I got the VC-backed bug. And so I wanted to work with B2B SaaS companies who were VC-backed on top of everything else. And so I stayed in that world for a while until 2016, when I actually got restructured out of a SaaS company that was VC-backed, but to Series E. So I had gone from a lot of Series A type companies or seed companies to the big dog. And in the midst of looking for my next VP of sales role, I say the universe conspired to take me in a different direction. One of my Christiisms is when the universe speaks, you should listen. And so
I
It was
read
very
that.
clear to me. The universe was speaking very strongly to me. And I had always wanted to dip my toe into the consulting world, but I still had a child in school, and not off to college yet. And so I thought, I always had intended to kind of do that after the fact, but it was very clear that that was not supposed to happen in my timeline. It was supposed to happen in the universe's timeline. So it's sort of like literally almost the rest is history. I had been doing the right thing by people all along. Like I'm a giver. I say I've got 30 minutes for everyone. And my
Yeah, I thought
other,
that was really interesting, by the way. I really like that idea in the book of saying whenever somebody reaches out, you make sure you offer them 30 minutes. And of
yes,
course, given the turnover and transition in professional B2B sales, I'm sure your calendar is packed with those kinds of meetings.
I'm getting a lot of those type of calls. Yeah. Unfortunately, and even in the last week, an SVP at the organization that I was reorged out of reached out and is looking for a new opportunity. And an SDR leader that I placed just 18 months ago also reached out after being, in that case,
Yeah.
that was a different situation, which something that we are dealing with right now. But the organization decided everybody was going to be back in office 5 days a week. And he was hybrid. And because they were hybrid, he actually had moved 2 hours outside of the city and was making that commute 2 days a week, but wasn't willing to make it five.
Oh,
So yeah. So anyway, so I got that call. I got two of those calls in the last week. So yeah, really, I have spent a lot of my time helping those companies that are in that early, like Series A B2B SaaS world, even transitioning from founder-led selling into hiring their first sales rep and putting all the sales processes together. So I spend my days mostly working with companies that are 0 to 5 million in revenue and need to, proselytize and document those type of things.
well, fantastic. And thanks for the share. And so just listening to that journey, one of the things that probably stuck with you for a while, but tell me a little bit about, your role as a buyer. How did that, outside of the negotiations, how did that help you have a little bit more empathy for what buyers are going through and what they see when salespeople are coming in to visit them?
Yeah, I mean, I spent, 1 week almost every month in New York negotiating with, I say Marty from Mud, trying to negotiate my best deal, trying to make sure I've got the assortment that I need. And so I think just understanding all of the different components of this has really made it, I mean, I understand that, I mean, again, so, I don't ever believe that negotiation has to be 50-50, but it does have to be win-win. And so there has to be something in it for everyone. So really spending my time, I think, in New York, trying to get the best deal for my company, trying to make sure that
Yeah.
I mean, I was bonused on margin. So,
So it was
so
pretty important to you.
gross margin was really important to me. Now I live in a world where we don't like what's profit, but that was really important. And really like each like 5 cents mattered. I mean, it really could because the quantities of material or clothing that you were buying, all of that really made a difference.
So there's a great example, team, of something where if you really understood that buyer and how they were actually compensated, what's important to them personally and then professionally for the organization, you can actually start to align to figure out how can you best help them. So it may not be, off top line fee for the actual service, but if you were bonused on margin, it's the whole cost of the life cycle, the shipping, the delivery, the drop, the packaging, that, all of these things are ways that a smart seller could actually, if they understood you, your business, your world, what was most important to you, they might be able to, at the negotiation table, rather than just trying to split a pie, make the pie a bit bigger for everybody.
Yeah,
So a
Mark,
lot.
when I'm talking to clients, and I kind of take them through as I'm building out sales processes, I make it very clear that there are two types of problems. There's the business problem and the financial impact that that's having on the business. But from the economic buyer or the influencer standpoint, there's a personal problem and the impact that that's having on them personally, their career, and just their day-to-day life. And so
Yes.
I'm always telling my teams to look at, you know, both problems, right? And so, from the standpoint of, like you said, based on my background, I was trying to do the best thing for the company, but I also had a personal stake in that
Of
game, very,
course.
very much.
Yeah. That's the one that we get tied to emotionally so much, Kristie. And again, by the way, thank you, Miller Hyman. Back in 1988, we just had Alice Hymans on the show
Oh,
frequently,
it's just,
but thank you, Miller Hyman, for one of those core models that's really stood the test of time. And I know you've got a lot of respect for a lot of other business process book or sorry, sales process books out there, but
mm,
Miller Hyman to me is something that's just so universal because there's still multiple people who influence a sale. You got to get consensus. They have personal and professional needs and wants. It's universal. And in
yeah,
that case,
Yeah,
Sorry,
funny that you
please.
dropped funny that you dropped Alice's name. So Alice and Liz Hyman are part of a networking group that I belong to. That's a fairly exclusive group of female sales consultants called Women Sales Experts.
Tuesday.
Jill Conrath. Well, Trish was a member, but Jill Conrath started it. Trish was an early member. Lori Richardson was running it till most recently. But yeah, I've been spending a lot of time over the last 5 years with Allison and Liz. And yes, they definitely are products of the Miller Hyman School of Business.
It's a great gang. So,
Yeah,
so I think 6 or 7 of that group have been on the show. So Lori's been on the
nice.
show.
Yeah,
Lisa Magnuson's been on the show.
yes, yes,
Without looking at the list, I think we're at 100 episodes now. So just magnificent conversations, by the way.
yes.
All thought leaders. But one of the things I love, and you speak a lot about this in the book, what I'm jealous of, not being a woman, is it's such a great peer group and support group
It
for
is.
all of you. And in the early days, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, when I used to do a podcast with one of them, they would then send me an email saying, you should put these 3 people on your podcast. That's how I ended up getting all these great people. But it's such a good peer group, actually, Kristie, because they look out for each other.
Yeah, you know from reading the book that one of my other mottos is your circle matters.
Sure it does.
And without having this circle, I don't think my business would be where it is today. And so I've never actually been a part of any kind of group, female or not, that has been so transparent about how, what they charge, how they decide to charge, giving, sharing contracts, sharing pitfalls. One of the first conferences I attended of the Women Sales Pros was in Minneapolis, where 2 of the presenters were talking about how their business was on the brink of failure. And so the very vulnerable. And so,
Yes.
like I was like, people were passing tissues around. I'm like, I did not think I was coming to a conference where I was going to need a tissue. But the fact of the matter is, I think, a lot of times I think men don't talk about failures in a very open and transparent way. And, the people who were brave enough to share that year about the things that had gone on in their personal and professional life that caused them to be on the brink of failure, were doing it so that we wouldn't end up in the same place. The rest of us in the room,
Yeah. Very
wouldn't end up in
giving.
the same place. So
Yeah.
yes, it was from a place of giving.
Yeah. Wonderful. So let's get into your book's very giving. And let's talk about some of the positivity you're putting into the universe with the book. The book's structured into 3 great sections. The first one I think is so unique that we don't see a lot of. We're going to talk a lot about. So section 1, developing your personal plan for becoming a rock star professional. Love the term rock star for a couple of reasons we'll get to in a second.
Okay.
But section 1, I like this focus on saying, hey, okay, folks, before you start jumping in and getting that first sales role, and by the way, according to Harvard, if you graduate college or university today, you've got a 50% chance of being in a professional sales job at some point in time in your career.
Yep,
So
that doesn't surprise me.
everybody's going to be in a professional sales job started, from this point forward. But you talk a lot about, hey, take a look inside first. Who are you? Let's understand who you are. What drove that for you, and what guidance can you give to folks when they're trying to do that assessment of who they really are?
Yeah, I think I see so many sales professionals who are not in the right sales role, as I call it. So they're not in the right sales role, selling the right product or service into the right industry at a, mid-market versus SMB versus enterprise, working for the right
Right.
company or even the right sales leader. And so the better you know yourself, things like, what comes naturally to me, where are my superpowers, as I call them, as well as things like, how do I like to be rewarded? Right.
Yeah.
I mean, what I think people don't understand is the breadth of sales roles that are out there, right? Everything from so again, as you know, because you read the book, I grew up in a family where we owned a real estate company.
Entrepreneurs. Yeah, it was great.
Right.
Kitchen
Yeah.
table entrepreneurs.
So my mother was 100% commission. My dad only took a salary when he didn't have to give it up to make payroll for the rest of his, his company, his employees. And so everything from, 100% commission sales rep to 100% base salary person, and it kind of everything in between. So do you, what's your risk profile? How do you
Yes.
like to be rewarded? How do you like to be managed? Are you someone, if you've been in sales, I think this book, not only for newbies, but people who are maybe not at the top 10% yet and can't figure out why,
Yes.
do you need a quicker sales cycle? Are you struggling to keep the sales cycle alive, if you will, over 6 to 9 months? And I think, do you like, are you an instant gratification person, right? Or are you a patience, do you have patience for, I like the game, right? I like playing the game and all the things it would take to play the game over 6 months, let's say. And so I think by stopping and asking yourself those type of questions, which you mentioned you downloaded the workbook, so there's a lot of opportunity in the workbook to answer those questions and put them in writing. But then, once you've figured all of that out and put it down, and you won't figure it all out, but there's a lot of it you already know, but you've never, again, I say, like, you just haven't gone to a quiet spot to
Yes.
to think these things over. And so when you do, then you'll be able to say, okay, I'm an instant gratification person. I need a sales cycle that's no more than 60 days.
Yes.
I'm not, my risk profile is at about, 70-30. Like, I need a little bit more base salary and a little less variable, or vice versa. Or I want unlimited potential. So I would take a 30% base salary and a 70% variable commission plan. So once you start to figure those things out about yourself, then all of a sudden your sales world narrows, right?
Yes.
Like, or,
Yes.
I've got a passion for whatever reason. I have a passion for healthcare. Like, for personal reasons or other reasons, but, I really do well with the healthcare professionals, or I really do well with HR professionals, or I don't mind dealing with those finance folks. Like, that CFO doesn't scare me. So when you start to figure that out, then the sales world isn't this big. It's this, like, I want you to find your swim lane, because
Yes.
that's where you have the best chance of getting to the top 10%.
Well, I think it's such great advice. And team, one of the things that this is where the book really resonates. It's right at the beginning, but it really stuck with me because I think far too often we're all driven by this outcome. Hey, I want the job. I want to say that I worked for Salesforce. I want to say I did this. I want to say this. But then you take a step back and go, okay, let me think about me. What do I like doing? And the other thing
Yeah.
I think is a really good thought for folks is you may jump into an organization and realize you were in the wrong spot. And that's okay. It's not failure. It's just
Mm-mm.
saying, hey, what's right for me? So sometimes you have to try a few things, get out there and figure out what's right for you and what's wrong for you. People always say, do what you love. What I love doing, I love playing drums and playing hockey. I wasn't good enough at either of them to be paid a lot for either. So
Yeah.
now I happen to really love doing this, but this is something I love that people will pay for. But it's okay to try some different things. But you kind of snuck in my view, what almost the most important part there. You said, what kind of leader do I work well with? No
Mm-hmm.
matter who you are in sales today, the X factor of professional sales is your leader.
That's
And
right.
there is a lack of great sales management out there in the world today. So for lots of good and logical reasons, venture capital is the cause of some of them. By the way, we'll get into in a
I
different
don't
podcast.
disagree with you, as you know.
Yeah. So really like that, team, as this takeaway, just thinking about yourself, playing to your strength, get your swim lane, know what's right for you. Then we get into principles and practices of a rock star sales process. And one of the things that, an indisputable truth in B2B sales, start with the ICP, know who you're selling into. And you spent
Yep.
a lot of time talking about this, but why was that kind of the first thing you jumped into in terms of sales process? Why is that so important for anybody out there listening to this podcast?
Yeah, I think it's probably a product of me working with startups who, a lot of times when I get there, don't have a defined ICP. I just talked to a client this morning who said, we want to talk to companies who are in growth mode.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, you only have two AEs. Uh, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you have a human resource issue. You don't have enough humans to decide that that's your ICP. And so I said, they have a very specific industry, so that helps. But I said, like, it can't. I said, first off, Zoom Info doesn't tell you that. Apollo doesn't tell you that.
Right.
Databases don't tell you that. They don't have a checkbox for, are they in growth mode or are they not in growth mode? So I said, we can't even go in and filter on that. So that makes that a bad ICP, characteristic, if you will, or it's not even a firmographic, right? It's a subjective item. So I think part of it is the product of I work in that 0 to 5 million world where we're still trying to identify that. But really, like I told him, I said, when you can't boil the ocean with two humans, right?
Yes.
And the majority of clients, and even 20 humans, right? Even if you had 20 account executives on your sales team, you wouldn't be able to boil the ocean. And so what do you really want to be known for? What do you really want to own? And I use this I use my personal example all the time. several years ago, and you may have had Bryn Tillman on the podcast, but if
We
not,
have,
add her to.
yeah,
Okay, I was like,
we
if
have
not,
had
add her
Brent.
to the list.
Yeah,
So
no, we've talked to Brent.
good. I had Bryn help me kind of revitalize my LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
And as we were going through it, she said, it's just, you've got, I don't know, at the time, there was X number of characters, right, that I could use to describe what I do. And she said, so I gave her, gave her my punchline, and she said, too broad. And I said, okay. So I did it again, and she's like, too broad. And we did that like a lot of times. So I got irritated, and I was like, well, what do you think I should say? She goes, you work with companies, you work with startup founders at 0 to 5 million who don't have any formal or documented processes, maybe don't have more than one or two salespeople. And she said, what you do is very specific.
Mhm.
And it sounded terrifying, right? Because sales trainer,
You feel
again,
like
right?
you're cutting off the rest of the
Right.
market.
That's right. I'm like, but I'm a sales trainer and a sales coach and a process expert and whatever. And she goes, yeah, so what? I mean, she's like, do you know how many sales trainers there are out there? And she said, do you really want to compete with all those people? And I'm like, no, I don't think so. And she said, you don't have to, because most of us don't want to deal with VC-backed early stage startups between 0 and 5 million. So if you say that, like, that will definitely, yes, it will narrow your world. And it was the scariest thing I did and the best thing I did. And I credit her for pushing me in that direction, because now, my elevator pitch is very short and people go, wow, that's really specific. And I go, yeah. And I'm the first person people think of when they need something that fits that very specific swim lane that I live in.
Well, and you mentioned, by the way, we love Brent. And for folks listening, by the way, you can go back to an episode of the Selling Well podcast, because Bryn Tillman is actually an expert on leveraging LinkedIn for sales. And she's got really practical advice for doing so, like this. Frankly, the advice she gave you is business strategy. It's not a LinkedIn suggestion.
That
It's
is
just
correct.
core business strategy.
Yes.
And although our ideal client profile is larger than yours, we actually, they still have these issues where you have folks selling into a market and they may have lots and lots of clients, but they haven't been quite specific about their ideal client profile and the one they really want to replicate. So you get into the Pareto principle with them.
Yes.
Okay, who are our best clients and why? Why do we want to replicate them? What problem? The more specific you get about your ICP, that ICP actually values what you bring to the table.
Yes.
So your unique value to your market, they'll realize it because they're your ideal client profile, and they'll pay for it. And
Correct.
you get away from, negotiation and price cutting and all those kinds of things. So I really like, you sharing your focus with the business and team. I think a lot of us can refine that when we start to think about our sales plans for, let's call it Q1 of 2025, based on when you're listening to this podcast. Sometimes we need to recalibrate those things. Take a look at what's working and what isn't. Which clients are actually trying to negotiate us into the ground or think we're a commodity. If somebody views you as a commodity, they're the wrong ICP. They're not seeing the unique competitive differentiation or value you bring to the table. And one of Kristie's is the fact that all she does is work with VC-backed startups. So she understands that world so well. I really think.
Even to take it a step further, your company that you work for may have an ICP, but you probably have a personal ICP, right? I mean, a lot of the clients I work for, they're like, hey, we're industry agnostic, right? Like we have software that can help see, let's say, accounting teams, right? So that's industry agnostic. But you personally might not be industry agnostic, right? You may do better with, again, manufacturing, or you may do better with software companies, or you may do better with healthcare, or you may do better with, logistics companies. So even within, and that's what that whole second section of the book is customizing and tailoring what the company may already be providing you. But if you came out of section 1 understanding what your superpowers are and how you like to be rewarded and what you do better than other people, then you may say to your sales leader, hey, instead of going after these 70 industries, I'd like to go after these 7, because I think I understand those. And even within personas, right? Most companies, there's 3 to 5 personas that you can be selling into, everything from the economic buyer to the champion or influencer.
Yeah.
And again, same thing. So like, hey, I might, even though the technical, the IT team may need to be involved from a security standpoint or this and that, I don't do so well with them. So I'm going to start with a different department. And then I may bring in, I may get a partner, bring in a solution consultant or a sales engineer to help me with that other side. So even though, again, Mark, you and I know that not always do we walk into a situation in a company where everything is baked out, if you will.
Really?
Some things are sometimes are half baked or some things are frozen. But if there is any baking going on at all, even if it's half baked, you should really be thinking to yourself, listen, even if I'm being put into a territory, where within that territory, what industry, what personas, what size companies, really, if you understand that, you're going to be able to play to your strengths. And
Yes.
let the guy next to you or the girl next to you, let them go after the industries you don't care about or the personas that aren't doing so well, or let them go hunt big game. If there's, I always say to people, I go, enterprise sounds sexy, but it's hard and there
There
aren't
it
that
is.
many of them. And the majority of the world lives in the SMB mid-market space. So why would I want to, go get mid-market again, faster sales cycle, easier to get decisions, fewer pieces of red tape. Legal doesn't get involved all the time. So, you got to think through all of those things. But
Yeah.
for even within, even when you've chosen a company that says this is how, this is our ICP and this is our personas, you got to be saying to yourself, but where within that can I really shine and win?
Great advice. Well, and one of the things that's nice about that, if you go after consistent ICP, they value the competitive differentiation you bring to the table. You learn. So every sales cycle you're involved in, you're not learning everything in the universe. You're learning more and more. Let's just pick an example. You sell into industrial manufacturing. You're understanding the trends, the issues, the challenges, the obstacles, what they face, all those kinds of things. And what I found really, really interesting when you were sharing your thoughts on knowing your industry, you had a great stat. The Training Industry Inc. and Value Selling Associates conducted a study to determine how B2B sales interactions are perceived by buyers and found that 75% of buyers say that sales reps don't demonstrate knowledge of their industry structure, and only 37% say sales reps provide unique industry insights.
Yeah, when I onboard new clients, and I'm part of that. So a lot of times I do what I call hiring help. I'm helping companies hire their first few sales reps, and then I do stick around as part of that package to help do some onboarding. And I train them on four things: industry, product, sales process, sales tools. But the very first thing I do, and I can spend up to a week doing this, is industry. If you don't truly understand the industry, and like you said, that's
Yes.
subject matter expertise, and you can't call into people if you don't truly understand, and then I say, not only do you understand the industry, but where your place in the ecosystem is as a company, right? The company that you're working for, where do you land in the ecosystem of that? So, again, like you said, manufacturing is a big industry, right? But where within that specifically does your company play best?
And couldn't agree more. And when you think of the life of a salesperson, one of the things you want to be doing in those any sales interaction is adding value in that conversation in some capacity. You want to be making some form of deposit before you ask for withdrawal. Very frequently, the folks who win sales cycles are the one where the buyer felt like they understood the buyer's world better than somebody else. And if you do understand that buyer's world better than somebody else, then you can figure out how to take them to a better place in the future. But you have to understand it. So I think one of the opportunities for everybody listening today is to say, in that next call, whatever it is, existing client, SDR reach out call, mid-cycle call to continue a discovery. Do we have value, insight, knowledge that is of some value to the recipient on the other end? And a lot of times I think we underestimate how much our organization knows about our client base. So we're not leveraging everything in our four walls to pull the information from client success or the product team or the CEO or the executive team or even our VP of finance to say, hey, what do we all know about the people we're selling into so that we can better arm our sales organizations to have intelligent conversations that provide value and insight?
Agreed. Yeah, there's a wealth of information out there, and I'm always surprised when I ask candidates as I'm interviewing them, "Hey, so did you join your local association?"
Nice. Like
Answers
the
no
inside sales
most of the time.
professionals. Yeah,
Yep, answers no most of the time, and I'm just like, those people. I mean, again, if you want to really understand your industry and become an industry expert, it probably costs you a minimal amount of money just to join your local, manufacturers, whatever fill in the blank. There's an association for everything, Mark, as you know.
of course.
So yeah, if you're selling into morticians, the National Mortician Association exists as well. So yeah, there's associations out there, and you should be, attending your local association, meaning the regional, national, if your company will let you go. But those things are invaluable, and they're not that expensive, and it's probably an hour or two a month.
And Kristie, great advice. And you snuck in there, by the way, when you're helping organizations hire, and then you help them on board. Onboarding is a pet peeve of ours. I experienced a wonderful onboarding plan a long, long time ago. I had a beautiful head of hair, almost exactly like yours in those days. But those days are gone when organizations would literally onboard you for 90 days in a different country, in a sales education center that was built for onboarding. Those days are over. I really do like all the everything in the book that's talking about how we do that. But let's talk about hiring for a second.
Mhm.
What are the attributes that you look for when you're interviewing somebody for a professional sales job?
Yeah, I think I say success begets success. So first and foremost, I want somebody who's been successful in a prior role, or even coming out of college, like who's been an athlete, who's been a leader at some sort of a club something at school. Because the people when you have felt success, you understand how that there's a physiological reaction to
Mhm.
winning, and so if you felt it before, you know what it feels like, and you want to feel it again. I want people who are ambitious. I want people who are independent. I don't, again, like I'm going to provide them some structure, but I always say, like, please don't check your brain at the door
Mhm.
when you walk through it every
It's
day.
a great one.
This is a high rejection sport, so I need people who are gritty and resilient. I need people who are going to be able to get up every day and hear the no's and then keep on going. I also want people who are, I would say, enterprising, but also innovative. So again, like I don't want, particularly again in the world I live in, the founder is probably a tech founder, and he probably has sold very little, just what he needed to do to get past the founder-led selling stage. And so I want to make sure that people are coming with some sort of personal process. So I do spend a lot of time talking to people about tell me about the current process, and then and then I ask them, how have you customized that? What's your personal sales process? Which part of that sales cycle, is your strength and that you're playing to it, and how has that made a difference in your close rate, those type of things. I also spend a lot of time looking for what I call things that probably like the intangibles, so to speak. So I say top 10 percenters are doing things outside of work
I
to
love
better
that.
themselves personally and professionally that the other 90% are confused by and aren't doing. So, when I ask a specific question, what three things do you do consistently, regardless of the company you're in or the sales role that you're currently in, that you truly believe if I do these things, I can be successful? And
Great
people
question.
top 10 percenters and people who know themselves will say, I'm at the gym every morning by 6. I have a tight circle of friends, and we get together quarterly to support each other. I listen to a business podcast instead of watching The Bachelor. I read a business book. I'm putting the right things in my body. I gave up drinking a few years ago because it wasn't serving me. I have a spiritual or religious practice.
Mm,
So those are the tipping points. When I hear that right away, I know I'm dealing with a different type of candidate.
yes.
And almost, yes, their prior success and skill and can they sell what we're trying to, what we want them to sell? But in general, those kind of people will figure it out, right? Like they have the discipline, and that's the other thing that we haven't talked about yet, Mark. But in order to stay within your ICP, in order to be a top 10 percenter, in order to do all those things and be top talent, it requires an extreme amount of discipline, because there's always a happy hour to go to instead of going home to family. There's always or going to the gym, right?
Yeah.
There's always something that can keep you from doing the right things. But people with discipline know that I need to do these things. Like, I'm an 8-hour sleep girl. Like, I just, and my friends know, if we go out, I'd say to them, at some point, I'm going to turn into a pumpkin. Cinderella going to turn into a pumpkin, and I'm just going to disappear on them, right? I'm going to
Yeah.
Uber myself home, because I don't need to be out till 1 or 2 o'clock. That's not
Right.
how I live my life anymore. I love going to happy hour. I love going out with my friends. And I love a good cocktail. But I also know that if I don't get 8 hours of sleep, I'm going to be not the best version of me the next day.
Right. By the way, really going back to the core question, I love this idea of trying to smoke out discipline and growth orientation. Many of those things that you called out, what are you reading? Do you go to the gym? What's your system? What podcast do you listen to? All those types of things. It's a combination of discipline and then this growth orientation where I know enough to become a learn it all instead of a know it all.
Yep,
And
lifelong
so,
learning. You can't. Yeah, that's not. You can't teach that. That's just an innate desire.
I think so. And Carol Dweck, and she's got a great book called Mindset, Carol Dweck Mindset, talks about the difference between growth mindset and then this fixed mindset. And just the impact on your own mental health, frankly. If you have this fixed mindset and you don't think you can get better, then anytime you fail, it's like a scarlet letter. It just crushes you. But if you have this growth mindset, you go, okay, I lost that hockey game, let in a couple of bad goals. Okay, let's watch the film. Let's try and get a little bit better. And I'm going to be a bit careful. I'm going to make sure I don't move before the shot next time, and I'll respond instead of anticipating.
I
Hey,
call it victim syndrome. We definitely don't want to hire people who have victim syndrome. Like, my territory
oh,
sucks, my manager sucks, my SDR sucks, marketing sucks.
by
Yeah,
the way,
you can identify those people right away and we can eliminate those pretty quickly.
exactly right. Accountability when you start
Yeah.
things. When we hire, we like intelligence, drive, humility, and then we like passion and
Mhm.
optimism.
I like
And
that. Yes. All
just
of those.
kind of things where I'm certainly no rocket scientist, but so you don't have to be on the top end of the spectrum in terms of intelligence to be good at sales, but you do have to be clever and quick and intellectually curious, and all of those kinds of things. So
Yeah,
um,
I'm hiring right now for a company, and the sales manager taught me a new term which I love and wish I had known before the book came out. I would give him full credit. He calls it situational fluency. That is one
oh,
of the traits
great.
he's looking for. I'm going to give it Guy Caldwell. I'll call him out. Guy Caldwell, sales manager at Biz Library. I'm helping them do a bunch of hiring right now. But he says, I'm looking for situational fluency. And I'm like,
Great.
wow. Yeah, right.
It almost feels like that's this combination of curiosity and emotional intelligence to be able to read the room and read the situation. That's I really like that term. That one will take
I
off.
know. That's a good one.
Another thing I really like, by the way, section 3 of your book, Selling Your Way In, where we're talking about bringing it all together and creating abundance. And there was this kind of theme about a mindset throughout the course of the book. You shared your putting positivity in the world by taking a 30-minute meeting with people. Most of the time in professional sales, by the way, those 30-minute meetings come when somebody's in between jobs, because one in
Yes.
3 people turn jobs every year. Most people in sales today last about 18 months in their current roles, even CROs. So I just think that kind of 30-minute meeting with someone like you who's got a network, it's a lifeline to someone, even if it doesn't turn into anything. Just the fact you took the meeting, I think it's
Mhm.
just such a great thing. But tell us a little bit more about section 3 and this idea of abundance versus scarcity, and this concept of mindset.
Yeah, I definitely think that that mental side of sales, it really has played into my career and my, success. And so really making sure that again, I do think that's what separates the 10% from the other 90. And so making sure that, that this is sort of what I call like, once you've gotten there, this is the give back, this is that 30 minutes for everyone, type situation. So I really want people to, and again, like there's so much, even before, like I do it in a lot of different ways. I'm also a junior achievement instructor, right? And so
Oh, awesome.
I like to go into schools. I want young girls to see me as a role model. I want them to know that you can own your own business as a woman. One of the things I love about junior achievement is it has a financial component to every single grade lesson. And most people in our
Smart.
country and other countries don't have financial literacy or financial acumen, business acumen. And so I really like that part about it. But I think like once you've gotten to a certain level, and again, I've had plenty of these people in my life. That Mike Weinberg wrote the forward to my book,
Yeah,
and
lovely.
he's always been one of those generous people who makes sure that he takes 30 minutes for everybody. He was, when we got ready to do the book launch, he was in constant contact with me, calling me all the time, like, "What are we doing? When are we dropping this? Here's what I'm gonna send out to my people." And those like and like
Great.
I mean, again, like I said, the universe takes care of you. So I'm not just doing it though because of what you're going to get back, but at some point, and I say this in the book, like because I was raised in an entrepreneurial family in the way that I was, and I call it getting my MBA at the kitchen table, I really feel like I have a responsibility to help share things that I learned along the way that other people's parents couldn't or wouldn't or didn't know how to teach them. And, environments that they grew up in. A lot of my friends, I get frustrated sometimes with things, and they're like, "We didn't grow up like you." And I'm like, "Okay, okay. Yeah, you're right." But we were, like, my dad, we, had very strong financial foundations and would, when I got my first job with the Jones Store Company, he said, how soon before you can contribute to 401k? And I was like,
Nice.
I don't
Smart.
know. Right. Yeah. And then it turned out to be 3 months. And he said, from the very second that you can contribute the max that they match if you can't contribute. But he said the goal is 10%. And he said, if you do that right away, you'll never miss it. It's just gone. Right. And if you continue, he said, and every time you get a raise, add another percentage until
Yes,
you get
nice.
until you get to the maximum. And so from that day forward, there's been I'm now at the age where I can do some catch up, because there were a couple of years where I didn't always max out. But since I've owned my business, I have a personal 401k. I max it out every year at the government's, maximum. And those kind of things, like people aren't taught, like there's even those basic things.
Yeah.
Like when I get into companies where stock options have been presented, I sit new employees down and say, do you even know what this means? Because people go, well, does it come with stock options? And I'm like, yep, sure does. And then I sit them down in my office and I close the door so we're private. And I go, and do you even know what a stock option is? And they're like, yeah, like you just gave me a piece of the company. I'm like, or you have to buy it.
Yeah.
Right. And people don't I see people all the time. And you mentioned the 18-month, abortion, like we're out of here, abort, 18 months, we're gone. But people don't understand that they have to purchase those.
Yes.
And in a lot of companies you don't want to leave without having done so. And so I always say to reps, like, hey, when you get a really good month of your, when you get a really good commission check, you should put some of that towards your stock options. But so I truly believe that I have a responsibility because I was raised in a way that other people weren't raised. And if I can help people better themselves financially, whether that's because I've got some sales advice for them or I just have good kitchen table advice that I learned while listening to my parents talk business every night, that, that's part of my give back as well.
Well, it's great. And by the way, indisputable. I'd be one of those people that did not have I had good book smarts, financial acumen up until my mid-20s, but I'd had some good things happen very early in my career. That money went up in flames. That money went to bars and good times, and it's all gone. So
your entertainment budget was high.
It was pretty high back in those days. So first of all, I can't believe it, but it looks like we're running down on time. And so first of all, Kristie, I just want to say thank you so much for joining the podcast today. One of the real pleasures of running this podcast is I get to read a whole bunch of amazing books by sales leaders, thought leaders, all that kind of good stuff, and then meet the people. It's been a real pleasure meeting you. I enjoyed very much reading Selling Your Way In, the playbook for setting your income and owning your life. How do the folks who've listening to this podcast learn more about you or engage you?
Sure. Again, if you want to know more about the book, you can go to sellingyourwayin.com. It'll take you to a section of my website. So then you'll also be on the website if you'd like to learn more about the services I offer. But what I'd really love for your listeners to do is connect with me on LinkedIn and drop me a note and let me know about their one takeaway from our conversation today.
Amazing ask. Fantastic. Thank you. We got to do that moving forward. That's a great idea. So, Kristie, thank you again for joining the podcast. Team, thank you for listening to the podcast today. We do this podcast because we're trying to improve the performance and professionalism of B2B sales teams, because we believe in doing that, we actually improve the lives of anybody associated with professional sales. So thanks for listening today. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, please like and subscribe to this podcast and tell your friends, because that's actually how we get great guests like Kristie. Also, we're growth oriented, and we know we're not perfect at doing this, and we know your feedback is awesome for improving the podcast. So please keep the feedback coming. We're growth oriented. We love constructive criticism. Send your suggestions to us on running the podcast or ideas for guests to Mark Cox at inthefunnel.com, Mark Cox at inthefunnel.com. That's my personal email, and I personally respond to everybody who gives us a suggestion. Thanks for doing so. We'll see everybody next time on the Selling Well podcast.